first, we put the Australian media to the test.
You may have heard in the news last week that Sydney is the most gullible city in Australia. Now, some of the country's most respected media brands, including your ABC, ran the story. But we think the story might be bullshit. Actually, we know it is because we made it up. And if you were watching Media Watch on Monday night, you'd have seen their story on the Levitt Institute.
It recently put out this report.
Deception detection across Australian populations.
Sydneysiders were the most gullible, Melburnians the least. The sort of comparison that's bound to get a silly survey like this plenty of coverage. Enough already. It's all a hoax. A quite elaborate one. All was due to be revealed on a new show which starts this very week on this very channel.
And on this very show, in fact. Now, here's why we did it. Every single day, media outlets are bombarded with thousands of press releases from all kinds of vested interests. What we set out to do was to put the media to the test to see whether they check those sources. Now, to do that, we created a fictional think tank, the Levitt Institute. Then we wrote a bogus 10-page report about gullibility in our major capital cities, knocked up a website in a couple of hours.
Some people think the hot pink is a little too much. I think that's brave branding.
Gave one of our reporters a crash course in being a spokesperson.
50% of them were able to decipher whether an article was false. Have I just got that completely wrong?
Then we had to get our press release out to the nation.
I've just created an account with a media release distribution service and put an embargo on it for 1 a.m. Monday because it can be a little bit quiet at the end of the weekend, so newsrooms are probably more likely to pick up our story at that kind of time. It's cost me about $350.
So all up, it took about 3 days of work. But from that point on, all we had to do was to sit back and see whether the media actually checked their sources. Who was going to pass the test?
Researchers claim Sydney is the most gullible city in Australia.
Interesting news this week. You may have seen a survey showed that Melbourne is the least naive or gullible capital city in Australia.
Hello, Paul Lauren Kennedy. Hello, Paul Lauren Kennedy. I'm just on another call. Can I give you a bell back? Is that all right?
Lauren Kennedy, Executive Coordinator of the research at the Levitt Institute. All sounds very uppity there, Lauren, but it's actually about how people believe urban myths, isn't it?
It is indeed.
So I guess what you're saying is that there is a high percentage of people believe everything they read without even sourcing it.
Exactly, and it's becoming more and more common with so much information, erroneous information, being available online now.
And that's just a sample of what we got. The news story was picked up by radio stations across the country and was on news websites for 9MSN, Yahoo News, Fairfax and various News Limited mastheads. It even made it to old-fashioned print, and that night made it on TV.
Now, in a report out today, we found that young Australians are extremely gullible.
And certainly none of these worthy news outlets seems to have bothered to check up on the Levitt Institute.
So if that's the case, then how did Media Watch find out? Well, it turns out there was a smart tack out there who had read the report and smelled a rat. It took them just 10 minutes of investigation to find out it was bunk and to tip them off. And that's because we left a few clues for them. First, the Levitt Institute's address was a derelict building. Its founder, Carl Vanson, is an alias of Jerry Seinfeld. Third, if anyone had actually read the report, they would have seen it was not only complete nonsense, but even explicitly said that it was entirely made up. And finally, the only Google hit for the Levitt Institute was our 2-week-old website. The truth was only ever a few clicks away, but almost no one bothered to check. Now, on Media Watch, Jonathan Holmes labelled our test of the media
blatant misrepresentation?
But we actually think that it had something very important to say about how the system works. Here's what the editor of the AAP, one of the newswires we used to distribute the story, had to say on Media Watch that night.
Any fair-minded observer would understand how this hoax, with supporting website, 10-page report, and PR people spruiking the results, could deceive a busy reporter facing rolling agency deadlines.
You know what? That's exactly our point. Every day, thousands of these press releases are sent out by all kinds of interest groups, including lobbyists, governments, and huge corporations, all of them with far more resources than we ever had. They have millions of dollars and full-time PR teams set to push their spin. And if newsrooms just don't have the resources to check everything, then how much of that information is getting through without being checked? How much spin is being passed off as news? One Media Watch home viewer did more research on our story than any journalist, and it took him 10 minutes.
And you can hear more about how that viewer figured it out in an interview with him, which is on our website.